In 1891, ministers of a European government stepped into an official chamber to assess a new acquisition of the state. Men trained for war, political intrigue and conspiracy. And yet, they couldn't look at the wall without reacting. Faced with that image, members of the cabinet did something that appeared in no political protocol. They crossed themselves, one by one, every time they passed it, not out of respect, out of fear. A critic of the time summarized his reaction in a single word printed in the newspapers: monstrous. Another was even more direct. This should not exist in public. There was no blood, no explicit scene of violence, no blasphemy spelled out in bold letters. Just a naked man, seated in darkness, staring directly at anyone who dared to meet his gaze. And there was one specific detail, almost invisible at first glance, that made an entire government recoil, as if it had encountered something alive, something that didn't feel painted, but waiting. Once you understand what that detail truly means, you'll understand why no one could remain in that room without making the sign of the cross. By the end of the 19th century, images were not neutral. They carried a moral function. European society at the time accepted nudity only when it was disguised as virtue. Bodies were tolerated only if they belonged to heroes, martyrs, or carefully domesticated myths. Evil, when it appeared, had to be defeated, subdued, humiliated. The devil could exist as long as he was on his knees. Franz von Stuck knew these rules well. He wasn't an outsider painting in a basement. He was a celebrated, award-winning artist, a professor at the Munich Academy of Fine Arts. He trained young artists who would later reshape 20th century art. He had money, prestige, and access to the elite. And precisely because of that, he had something to lose. Stuck lived in a world where art was still expected to please, to educate, and to reinforce social values. But he wasn't interested in affirmation. He was obsessed with conflict. While the public expected elevated allegories, he moved towards something dirtier: desire, the fall, envy, resentment. His great gamble was not to shock through violence. It was something far more dangerous: to show evil without punishment. In 1890, when he decided to paint Lucifer, Stuck did not imagine a monstrous creature. He didn't create horns, fire, or chains. He chose something far more disturbing: a human body, calm, intact, a being who doesn't seem to suffer, who doesn't ask for forgiveness, and who, above all, does not appear defeated. That was what this society was not prepared to face. When the painting is finally placed before the viewer, there is no immediate shock, no scene of violence, no action unfolding. The impact comes from the opposite: a naked man, seated, motionless, pressed against his own shadow. The space around him feels non-existent. There is no defined ground, no horizon, no depth. It is as if the body has been pushed into a sealed, airless void. His legs are pressed tightly together in a gesture that feels almost defensive. The torso leans slightly forward. The head rests on the left hand, like someone thinking in silence. But this is not the gesture of a serene thinker. It is the gesture of someone who is waiting. Now, look at the face. The eyes do not reflect light. They seem to generate something of their own, a cold, sickly green, almost chemical. Critics of the time struggled to describe it without resorting to disgust. Some spoke of a cadaverous gaze. Others said it looked like the glow of something that should not be conscious. That greenish tone is not accidental. It breaks with every classical ideal of a healthy or divine body. It is not full life. It is not death. It is permanence. Lower your gaze to the right arm. The shoulder twists backward at a strange, unnatural angle. The muscles tense in a way that doesn't belong to rest. The hand disappears completely into the darkness behind the body. This detail deeply unsettled those who studied the work up close. Because the gesture is not one of pain, nor of restraint. It is intimate. Engravings and preparatory studies reveal what the main painting hides with calculated cruelty. There, enormous wings emerge, dark, heavy. He is not fighting against them. He is not chained. He touches them as someone who recognizes something that still belongs to him. And then you understand the true trick of the image. Nothing in it screams hell. Nothing begs for condemnation. Everything is far too calm. The body is whole. The gaze is lucid. The posture is one of control. This is not a demon in the act of falling. It is someone who has already fallen and survived long enough to think about what comes next. And that is exactly where the painting begins to truly disturb. If this story has already started to make you uncomfortable, it's because you're looking in the right place. So take a moment now. Leave a like. It tells the algorithm that this kind of investigation deserves to keep existing. And if you want more stories where art is not decorative, but dangerous, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to stay inside the next revelations. Here, the frame is never the problem. The problem is what's behind it. To understand why this image triggered immediate revulsion, you have to remember an unwritten rule of the time. Evil was only acceptable when it came packaged with punishment. In 19th century academic and religious painting, the devil existed as a moral warning. He appeared crushed, defeated, or ridiculed. He served to confirm order, never to question it. Lucifer breaks that rule with surgical precision. Here, evil is not being punished. There is no fire, no fall in progress, no visible pain. The body is not monstrous. It is human, recognizable, almost uncomfortably close. That was the first taboo violated, transforming the ultimate symbol of evil into something that doesn't provoke immediate repulsion, but silent identification. The second taboo runs even deeper. The gaze. It does not turn toward the heavens in repentance. It does not drop to the ground in shame. It looks directly at the viewer. Within the moral logic of the time, this completely inverted the hierarchy. The viewer was meant to judge the image, but here the sensation was different. The image seemed to be judging the viewer. The public's expectation was clear. A biblical painting should teach, comfort, reaffirm that the order of the world remained intact. The reality before them was the opposite. The work offered no conclusion. It explained nothing. It did not say who was right. It simply presented a being conscious of his own fall and still whole. Where a lesson was expected, there was ambiguity. Where morality was expected, there was silence. Where redemption or punishment was expected, there was waiting. That frustration was interpreted as a threat, because a society that depends on clear symbols cannot tolerate images that refuse to obey. And Lucifer obeyed nothing, not religion, not politics, not the decorative role art was supposed to fulfill. And it was at that point that aesthetic discomfort began to mutate into something far more dangerous. Institutional fear. The reaction did not come in the form of an official ban. There was no decree, no public seizure, no symbolic bonfire. What came was worse: silence. After Lucifer began circulating among authorities and high-ranking collectors, something shifted around Franz von Stuck. Invitations became scarce. Comments grew evasive. Critical enthusiasm evaporated. No one openly said the work was unacceptable, but everyone behaved as if it had gone too far. When the painting reached the hands of a European prince, the story crossed the line from aesthetic discomfort into political scandal. Ministers who were meant to evaluate cultural acquisitions began reacting like frightened believers. The sign of the cross, repeated almost ritualistically, spread as an embarrassing anecdote through the corridors of power. And anecdotes, when they circulate too widely, turn into verdicts. Stuck heard the story with a smile, but the effect was corrosive. From that point on, his name stopped being associated with respectable innovation and began carrying an unease that was hard to define. He was not accused of heresy, nor of explicit immorality. He was something worse for the art system of the time: unpredictable. As the years passed, public taste shifted. Grand symbolic narratives began to feel outdated in a world collapsing around them. War redefined real horror, and artists like Stuck, once seen as dangerous provocateurs, were recast as relics of an uncomfortable past. The isolation was gradual: smaller exhibitions, less attention, less voice. When he died in 1928, Franz von Stuck no longer stood at the center of artistic debate. The man once called the Prince of German art departed without a final scandal, without public redemption, without an audience. The humiliation was not a direct attack, it was erasure. And perhaps that was the true price of Lucifer: not immediate censorship, but the slow condemnation of someone who dared to create an image that neither the church, nor the state, nor the critics knew where to place. In that world, provocation was allowed, as long as the artist agreed to disappear afterward. Stuck did not agree, but the system decided for him. Time did what governments could not. It did not erase the image. Decades later, when wars redefined what was truly monstrous, the painting lost its label as an immediate threat. Museums reopened, archives were revisited, and the name Franz von Stuck began to circulate again, not as a dangerous provocateur, but as a precursor. What had once been called immoral began to be reread as psychological. Silence became introspection. Darkness became awareness. Today, Lucifer is no longer seen as an attack on institutional faith. It is something far harder to neutralize: a portrait of evil without spectacle, without punishment, without excuse. What still unsettles is not the nudity, nor the biblical subject. It's the gaze. That gaze does not beg. It does not threaten. It observes. And perhaps that is why the painting survived. Because it doesn't tell us what to think. It forces us to notice something far more uncomfortable: that evil does not always arrive as chaos. Sometimes it sits, thinks, and waits. Ministers crossed themselves because they understood, even without words, that the image was not asking to be judged. It was returning the gaze. And when art does that, the problem is never the frame. It's the one who dares to look. Now tell me, if you had been in that room in 1891, would you have managed to stay without making the sign of the cross? If you made it this far, that gaze didn't make you look away. So do this. Leave a like. Subscribe to Behind the Frame. Enable notifications, because every week we open files museums prefer to keep sealed. Scandals, silences, and works that still watch those who dare to face them. The official story always looks clean. The real one almost never does. See you in the next case.